Good evening. Welcome to the Fright Files. My name is Chris Harmon, but as usual, you can call me Dr. Fright. Madam Mia will be joining us here shortly. But tonight we have a very special show, as we have selected some very special stories to send chills up and down your spine. But before we begin tonight, I must ask all the Fright fans out there watching to be sure and ask yourself this one all important question. Can you withstand all stories till the end? If the answer is yes, then let's get started. This first story I call The Painted Door. At the edge of a once thriving town, where the streets now lay cracked and forgotten, stood a debilitated mansion, a relic of time when life busted through the town's veins. The mansion, with its crumbling walls and overgrown gardens, had long been abandoned, its windows dark and empty like the hollow eyes of a ghost. But there was one feature of the mansion that always stood out, a detail that made even the bravest of souls shudder. A door. A door that no one could open. The door set in the furthest corner of the mansion's main hallway was unremarkable at first glance. The paint was chipped and faded, and the wood warped and splintered with age. But those who ventured close enough to truly look at it found themselves overwhelmed by a sense of dread, an inexplicable terror that seeped into the bones and gnawed at their sanity. You see, the door was an enigma, a mystery that had defied explanation for decades. The townspeople spoke of it in hushed tones, recounting stories of those who had tried to open it, only to be driven mad by what lay beyond. For years, the mansion remained empty, a monument to the town's forgotten past. But that all changed when a new family arrived, seeking to breathe life back into this decaying structure. The family, the Tanners. The Tanners had moved to the town in search of a fresh start. The father, David, had taken a job at the nearby factory, and his wife, Helen, had fallen in love with the mansion's old world charm. Now, despite its obvious state of despair, the son, Jacob, a quiet and curious boy of 12, was less enthusiastic about the move. But he soon found himself captivated by the mansion's secrets. Oh, yes, from the moment they moved in, Jacob felt the pull of painted door. He felt the pull of the painted door. It was as though the door was alive, watching him with uneased eyes, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Every time he walked by, he felt a cold chill run down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the door was somehow changing, new cracks, openings in the wood, fresh smears of paint that smelled to shift, that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking. The door seemed to beckon him, calling to him in a voice that only he could hear. The rest of the family seemed oblivious to the door's presence. David was preoccupied with his work, and Helen busied herself with cleaning and restoring the mansion's many rooms. But Jacob couldn't ignore it. The door consumed his thoughts, filling his dreams with dark, twisted images that left him waking in a cold, cold, cold sweat. He tried to tell his parents, but they dismissed his concerns as the product of an overactive imagination. Determined to uncover the door's secrets, Jacob began to spend more time in the hallway, watching, waiting for anything to happen. It wasn't long before his patience was rewarded. You see, one stormy night, as the wind howled through the trees and rain lashed against the windows, Jacob lay awake in his bed, the sounds of the storm echoing in his ears. He was restless, his mind churning with thoughts of the door. Unable to sleep, he decided to go downstairs, hoping to calm his nerves with a glass of water. And as he reached the bottom of the stairs, he heard it, a faint rhythmic knocking coming from beyond the painted door. The sound was barely audible over the storm, but it sent a jolt of terror through him. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the door, the knocking growing louder with each step. Standing before the door, Jacob hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the doorknob. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on him like a weight. He held his breath, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the knob, and to his surprise, the door swung wide open. The room beyond was small, barely more than a closet, dimly lit by a single flickering candle that cast long dancing shadows on the walls. You see, the air was thick, with the scent of mildew and something else, something dark and unnameable. Then Jacob's eyes widened as he took the sight before him. Walls covered in paintings, each one more disturbed than the last. The painting depicted scenes of terror and despair, twisted visions that seemed to crawl from the darkest corner of the human mind. One showed a man trapped in a burning house, his face contorted in agony as flames flickered. Another depicted a woman drowning in a sea of black, her hands clawing at the surface as she was dragged down the depths of hell. And each painting was so vivid, so lifelike that Jacob felt as though he could hear the screams of the figures trapped within the frames. As he moved deeper into the room, Jacob's gaze was drawn to the painting in the center of the wall, drawn to the painting sitting in the center of the wall. It was larger than the others. Its frame glided, but what caught his attention was the scene it depicted. It showed a family standing outside the mansion, their faces turned down. The father was tall and strong, the mother graceful and kind, and the boy looked exactly like Jacob. Oh shit, he thought. His heart raced as he realized the painting was of his own family, captured in perfect detail as they had appeared on the day they moved in to the mansion. The figures were frozen in time, their expressions blank, almost lifeless. But as Jacob stared at the painting, the figures seemed to shift, their faces slowly twisting, into the expressions of fear and anguish. The boy's eyes, once bright with curiosity, were now wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. Horrified, Jacob stumbled backwards, his breath coming in short. Panic gasps as he had to get out. He had to get out. He had to get out. He had to leave the room before whatever force had a hold of him. He had to leave before whatever force had created the paintings could take a hold of him too. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapped him inside. The candle flickered widely, casting grotesque shadows on the walls as the paintings seemed to close in around him. Jacob pounced on the door, his fist brushing against the unyielding wood. Help! Let me out of here! Help! Help! He screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness, the walls closing in tighter and tighter and tighter, and the air growing thick and suffocating. The paintings, the figures on the walls, seemed to reach out towards him. Their twisted faces filled them malice and despair. In a last desperate attempt to escape, Jacob threw himself at the door, but it was in no use. The room was alive with a malevolent force, and it had claimed him. It had claimed him as its own. The last thing Jacob saw before the darkness consumed him was his own reflection in the glass of the nearest painting. His face pale and contorted with terror, his eyes wide with the realization that he was now part of this cursed collection forever. The next morning, the mansion was quiet, the storm having passed in the night. Helen and David awake to find their son's bed empty, his room undisturbed. Panic set in as they searched the house, calling his name, Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. But there was no sign of Jacob anywhere. It was as though he had simply just vanished. Their search eventually led them to the hallway, where the painted door stood closed as it always had. But this time something was different. The door, once chipped, once faded, was now smooth and freshly painted, the wood gleaming in the morning light, and on the wall beside it, where the paint had been chipped and cracked and peeling, hung a new painting, a portrait of a young boy, his face twisted in silent screams, his eyes filled with terror that would never fade. The Tanners left the mansion that very day, unable to bear the weight of their loss and the darkness that hung over the house. The mansion, once again, fell into despair, its secrets hidden behind the locked doors and peeling paint. But those who passed by the old house would sometimes speak of the painted door and the boy who had been lost to its curse, forever trapped within the walls of the haunted room. The painted door remained closed, its secrets locked away, waiting for its next soul, brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. That was the tale of the painted door, a tale that sends shivers down my spine each time I think of it. And now, as we await Madame Mina, we must move to our next frightful tale. This tale can be somewhat frightening, can be somewhat horrifying to even think about. This is the tale of the midnight train. In the small fog-drenched town of Hollow Creek, where the nights were long and the morning slow to rise, there was an old legend that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. It was the story of the midnight train, an ancient rustic locomotive that appeared only at the stroke of midnight. The townsfolk whispered of the train's ghostly passengers, souls of those who had died in a terrible accident many years ago, forever trapped between the world and the next, searching in vain for a way to reach the afterlife. Daniel had always been fascinated by trains. The clickery clock of wheels on the tracks, the hiss of the steam, the shrill of the cry. These were sounds that filled him with a sense of wonder and excitement. But even more than that, Daniel loved a good ghost story. Now, when he heard about the midnight train, a thrill of anticipation tinkled in his chest. Now, the other children in the town were too afraid to even speak of the train. But Daniel was different. You see, he wanted to see it for himself to find out if the stories were any at all true. Yes, folks, it was a cold, foggy night when the mist hanging thick in the air like a ghostly shroud that Daniel decided to put his own plan into action. His parents had long since gone to bed, and the town was quiet, the streets deserted. Daniel crept out of his house, careful not to move a sound, and make his way through the fog towards the old abandoned station on the edge of town. The station had once been a bustling hub of activity, but it stood in ruins, its roof covered in platform overgrown with weeds. The air was damp and heavy, the fog swelling around Daniel's leg as he walked onto the platform. He could barely see a few feet in front of him, the fog thick it seemed to swallow up the world. But Daniel wasn't afraid. No, he was determined to see the midnight train, to prove to himself that the stories were just that, just stories. As the clock in the town square struck midnight, Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The night was eerie silent, the fog hanging in the air like a living thing, and then the faint at first but growing and then faint at first but growing louder. He heard it, the distant sounds of the train whistle, a mournful ghostly wail that sent chills down his spine. A moment later, the screeching of the metal on the metal pierced through the night as the train pulled into the station. Its arrival, Hercule, its arrival heralded by a rush of cold air that seemed to come from out of nowhere. The train was just as the stories had been described, old and decayed. Its once bright colors faded and peeling, its windows cracked and covered in grime. The engine hissed and sputtered, the metal growing as it, the metal groaning as if under a great weight. The doors slid open with a slow, mournful hiss, revealing a dark, silent interior. Daniel hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. The train seemed to call to him, a low, instant pull that he could not resist. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a final echoing clog. The interior of the train was cold and silent, the air thick with the sense of dust and decay. The seats were covered in a final layer of grime, the fabric torn and faded. The train began to move. Its wheels cluttered over the tracks, and Daniel felt a strong sense of unease settling over him. He looked around, and for the first time he noticed the other passengers. They were ghostly figures, pale and transparent, their eyes hollow and vacant, the faces devoid of emotion. They sat in the seats around him, their bodies still, their gazes fixed on the floor. As the train picked up speed, hurtling through the fog, the ghosts began to stir. Their heads turned slowly towards Daniel, their eyes locking onto him with a chilling intensity. They whispered in unison, their voices soft, echoing like the rustle of leaves in the wind. Help us find peace. Daniel's heart raced as he realized the true nature of the train. It was not just a ghostly relic. It was a vessel carrying the souls of the dead, forever trapped in on the endless loop, unable to reach their final destination. The train was cursed, doomed to ride the tracks for all eternity. Its passengers lost between worlds, searching for a way to move on. Panic, panic gripped Daniel as the whispers grew louder, more instant. The ghosts moved closer, their hollow eyes filled with despair. Des- Desperation, and sorrow. He wanted to scream, to jump from the train and run, but his body was frozen, his feet rooted to the floor. The train hurled through the darkness, the scenery outside a blur of shadows and fog. The station slipped, floating into the distance. As the train sped on, Daniel realized, with a growing sense of dread, that he had sealed his own fate by boarding the midnight train. He had become one of its own passengers, bound to ride the tracks for all eternity, just like the ghosts who now surrounded him. The last thing Daniel saw was the faint light of the station disappearing in the distance before the train vanished into the fog, leaving no trace behind. The next morning, the platform was empty, shrouded in the mist, with no signs of the train or the boy who had dared to board. The villagers searched for Daniel, but he was never seen again. The legend of the midnight train grows stronger after that night, a cautionary tale for those who might be tempted to venture to the old station at midnight. The train still rides the tracks. The train still rides the tracks, and it is waiting, its ghostly whistle echoing through the night, carrying the souls of the last, carrying the souls of the lost, forever searching for the peace they will never, ever find. Do you dare to ride the train at midnight and become one of the passengers forever? I hope you enjoy that frightful tale. I would like to welcome to the stage Madam Mina. Welcome, Madam Mina. Welcome to the stage to the Fright Files.
Hello, friends and fiends. Are you ready for a spooky story? This one is from the Paranormal subreddit, and it's titled, I live in the heart of Appalachia, and this is easily the most terrifying story of one of my experiences. This story may be short, or it may be drawn out. I'm recounting these events as I type it. As I type it, it honestly was one of the most horrifying things I have ever experienced, and it brings me genuine stress to think about it. This happened maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I live in southern West Virginia, and I have for my entire life. The woods and mountains surround every direction you look, and nighttime is a darkness you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with a friend. I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening, doing the usual things, watching UFC, playing Xbox, etc. It was extremely late when we finally got bored and decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke. This is not a particularly long trail, but it is very dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when thinking of your surroundings. We finally get to about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop, pack our cigarette, and stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There are always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time was unsettling. At this point, it was probably past 1 a.m. There was this strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting, as any sort of predatory animal in the area may cause a disturbance. We finish smoking and continue our walk when almost immediately the forest falls dead quiet. And as soon as the forest goes quiet, there's a voice. It almost sounds like a mocking humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain, almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice, if you know what I mean. This immediately sets us off. We bolt directly down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get closer per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remains the same volume, going over and over with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I am convinced that we are in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, gasping for breath and almost at the verge of tears of how frightening this was. We begin to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there is a bone shaking, heart stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. Hold on, I lost my spot. Okay, sorry. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most genuinely depraved and violent scream that I have ever heard. This is a true story that I have only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I have never been a person to push for the experience, or sorry, I have never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believe I encountered something inhuman in those woods. Edit. I know I will receive questions such as what the voice was possibly saying, or to explain the area and what happened after. I genuinely cannot remember what the voice was saying, if anything intelligible. I don't know if I could understand it then, and I certainly can't recall understanding it after several years of blocking it out of my memory. All that I recall is that it was a fluctuating voice and pitch, shaking, almost joining sounds together. After running from the scream at the end of the trail, we ran to the car, which was only about 5 minutes from the trail. So we got there relatively fast from sprinting. I hope you enjoyed this spooky story, Dr. Fright.
Oh, yes, this story was very frightful. I can hardly keep my hands from shaking. It's a wonderful thing to hear such a frightful tale. And I want to say thank you to everybody in the chat room here tonight. We have a lot of great people here. And we are also transmitting and being seen in Canada and also in Indonesia as well. So hello to all the frightful fans there. And yes, Madam Mina, that was a very frightful tale. Which brings us to our next story that I will be glad to share with the world. This next tale I call The Cold Case. You see, Detective Evelyn Carter has seen her share of unsolved cases, but the one that haunted her for years was the disappearance of Aubrey Palmer. Aubrey had vanished without a trace 5 years ago on a cold autumn night. The small town of Millwood had never even been the same since. Its streets shadowed by whispers and suspicious. Evelyn had promised Aubrey's mother she would find the truth, but the case had gone cold, with no leads until that is now. A call come in late one evening as Evelyn sat at her desk, staring at Aubrey's old case file. The voice on the other end was garbled, as if one person was speaking through a bad connection. But the message was clear. I know where she is. I know where she is. Meet me at the old mill at midnight. Evelyn's heart raced. The old mill was abandoned, a crumbling relic of the town's industrial past. It was also notorious for its eerie atmosphere, with locals claiming to hear strange noises and see shadowy figures around it at night. But Evelyn wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. No, no, no. She was a detective, and she followed the evidence no matter how strange. So, as midnight approached, Evelyn drove to the mill, her mind buzzing with anticipation and dread. The town was quiet, the streets empty, as if the entire population was holding its breath. When she arrived at the mill, the fog was thick, clinging to the ground like a shroud. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and broken, the once proud structure now a skeletal reminder of a forgotten era. Evelyn parked her car and stepped out, the cold biting through her coat. She shined in her flashlight towards the entrance and saw a faint light flickering inside, casting a long, distorted shadows on the walls. As she approached, the heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor that led deeper into the mill. The air was musty, filled with scent of damp wood and rusting metal. Her footsteps echoed off the walls as she ventured further into the light, ahead guiding her like a beacon. As she turned a corner, the light flickered out and went out, plunging her into the darkness. She paused, straining to hear anything in the silence that pressed around her. A creak of wood behind her made her spin around, her head instinctively reaching for her gun. But there was nothing. Nothing. Just the empty corridor stretching back into the gloom. So she turned back, only to find the light ahead of her return now, stronger, even more instant, almost as if it was pulling her forward. Evelyn followed the light until she reached a large open room filled with old machinery, its hulking shapes barely visible to the dim glow. In the center of the room was an old wooden chair, and sitting on it was a man she didn't recognize. His face was not, his eyes hollow, and his clothes were ragged. He smelled. He held a small, flickering lantern in one hand, the other hand resting on his lap. Who are you? Evelyn deemed, her voice firm with respect. Firm. Who are you? The tension coiling in her chest. Then the man looked up, his eyes looking at hers. You don't remember me, do you, detective? His voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. But you've been looking for me for a long time. Evelyn's mind raced, trying to place his face, but nothing came to her. I don't know you, she said, taking a cautious step forward, her hand still on her gun. But if you know where Aubrey is, you need to tell me now. The man smiled a cold, mirthless expression. The man smiled in a cold, mirthless expression that sent a shiver down her spine. Aubrey isn't lost, detective. She is right here in this very room. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She scanned the room, her flashlight beam darting over the machinery, the walls, the floors, but there was nothing, no sign of Aubrey or anyone else. You're lying, she said, her voice hardening. If this is some kind of a sick freaking joke, it's no joke. It's no joke, the man interrupted, his smile folding. Aubrey is here. She's been here all along, waiting for you to find her. Evelyn's heart pounded as she approached the man, her flashlight beam steady on his face. Where is she? Where is she? Her voice demanded, her voice rising with anticipation. The man didn't answer. Instead, he slowly raised his hand and pointed to the corner of the room, where a large old trunk sat covered in dust and cobwebs. Evelyn's stomach twisted the dread, but she forced herself to walk over to the trunk, her flashlight shaking slightly in her grip. She hesitated for a moment, then knelt down and brushed away the dust. The trunk was heavy, its lid slightly ajar. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself, and then lifted the lid. Inside, she saw the remains of a body, long decomposed, its clothes tattered and discolored. A small silver locket lay among the bones, its chain broken. Evelyn breath Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the locket. It was the one Aubrey had worn the night she disappeared. Evelyn stumbled back, her mind reeling. The man's voice echoed in the room, soft and eerie. I told you, detective. I told you Aubrey was here. She turned back to the man, but the chair was empty. He had vanished, leaving only the flickering lantern on the floor. The room seemed too close in one, the shadows growing darker in the room. The room seemed to close in on her. As the shadows grew darker, more oppressive, she felt a chill run down her spine as a low voice whispered in her ear, "You should have left it alone. You should have left it alone, detective. You should have left it alone. Now you'll join her. Now you'll become what she has become." Evelyn spun around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. Panic surged through her as she realized the truth. The man hadn't been real. He was a ghost, a manifestation of the evil that had taken Aubrey and now sought to claim her as well. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing thicker, more solid. The air turned frigid, and Evelyn felt an icy hand brush against her cheek. She bolted for the door, her heart racing, but the exit seemed impossible to find. The shadows followed her, whispering her name, Aubrey, Evelyn, Evelyn, Evelyn. The name, the sounds mocking her, taunting her. With Aubrey's fate, Evelyn busted out of the mill and into the cold night, her breath coming in ragged. Gasps! She couldn't stop running until she reached her car. Throwing herself inside and locking the doors, she grabbed the steering wheel, gripped it tight, her knuckles white as she tried to calm her racing heart. She forced herself to look back at the mill, half expecting to see the man standing in the doorway, grinning that cold, empty smile. But the building was dark and silent. The only movement came from the swaying trees in the wind. Evelyn drove back to the station in a daze, her mind replaying the night's events over and over. When she arrived, she found the precinct empty, the lights dimmed for the night. She made her way to her desk and collapsed in the chair, staring blank at Aubrey's case file. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. "Did you find what you were looking for, Evelyn?" Her blood ran cold, her hands trembled as she typed out a reply. "Who is this? Who is this?" A moment later, the reply came. "Aubrey." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Her hand hovered over the phone, unsure of what to do. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe it was a cruel joke, a prank by someone who knew about the case. But deep down she knew the truth. She looked at she looked up and froze. Reflected in the dark window behind her, she saw Aubrey standing in the shadows, her face pale and hollow, her eyes fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Evelyn spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, silent, except for the sound of her own breathing. The phone buzzed again, and she slowly looked down, dread curling in her stomach. The message was from the same number, and this time it was just one word: soon. Evelyn dropped the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a presence behind her, cold and malevolent, and the whispers started again, soft and intense. Aubrey was still out there, trapped between worlds, and now she had found Evelyn. The curse wasn't cold anymore. The case wasn't cold. It was just the beginning. And now we send it back to Madam Mina. Do you have another frightful tale if you survived this one?
Yes. So this one is from the subreddit r/no sleep, and it was posted by a boy named Pseudonym. It's titled, "So You Guys Like Skinwalker Stories? I have a quick one for you." I posted one on another thread, but it was so long ago I didn't want to hijack the comments section of a good story. I am Dine Navajo, and boy, have I heard a lot of stories growing up on the reservation. While I never seen anything myself, which I am grateful for, I have benefited by being around the people who have. There is a different kind of evil that exists in the quiet, high deserts and deep sandstone canyons of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, even Colorado in the southern Ute area. I can only describe it as an ancient evil now. There are helpful ceremonies, rituals, and traditions that are still practiced to this day. Heck, even a local hospital has an on-duty medicine man, but it seems to be a double-edged sword. What I mean is that there is also black magic, which most Dine will not even acknowledge or speak of. We are very superstitious and are heavy with taboos. You will find this with most First Nation people from Alaska to Argentina. It's just something you don't do in fear that it will get the attention of unwanted spirits or harmful beings. Skinwalkers or Naldolushi are just a few stories that keep me up at night with the covers over my head. Here's a quick one for you guys. A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lightly snowing, maybe a fourth of an inch, which is a lot of snow for home, and he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there or where she was going was not apparent because she was so far out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't see her right away, but as he passes, he noticed that she is dressed in traditional clothing, a shawl, dress, moccasins, and her hair in the traditional bun. Not too odd, but many elders still choose to dress traditionally. But why was she out in such cold weather this late at night? Hitchhiking, maybe. He passed her too quickly, and now he has to turn around. And as he makes a U-turn, he notices she is nowhere to be seen. This is a fairly flat terrain, and he for sure saw an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with his flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footsteps in the shallow snow. He follows the footsteps until they suddenly turn into what look like dog footprints leading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with another officer near his patrol. He is a little shaken up, but asks the other officer if he has ever seen anything like that. The officer tells him that he has. He also explains that sometimes it's an old woman, sometimes a very beautiful young girl, but always on the side, always on that road, and always in the snow, waiting for the right Good Samaritan to let her in their car. I still get nervous driving those wide open spaces at night. I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I rarely pick up hitchhikers, but I never pick them up at night. Ooh, that was a spooky one.
Yes, indeed. I enjoyed that frightful tale. And now, folks, I bring you to our next and final tale of the evening. This tale is not for the faint of heart, and this tale is the most frightful tale of the evening, one of which you may never have heard before. As dive deep to the depths of hell to bring you the tale of the Phantom Taxi. You see, in a bustling city where life moves at a frantic pace, urban legend circulates like wildfire. One of the most chilling tales is that of the Phantom Taxi, a cab that appears out of nowhere. Its drivers on eerie figures with offers rides to lost souls. Once inside, passengers are never seen again, vanishing without a trace. The legend is mostly dismissed as a ghostly story, a cautionary tale to avoid holding cabs. Late one night and late every night, the cab picks up souls and claims it as its own. And some swear this is true. Ryan, a skeptical journalist, had heard the story of countless times over and over and over, but he's never believed it. He's the kind of person who needs the hard evidence, not ghost stories. But one late night, after working a grueling shift, he finds himself stranded in the rain with no ride home. As he stands on the curb, soaked to the bone, a taxi pulls up beside him. The taxi is old, it's yellow painted, faded and peeling, but it looks serviceable enough. Ryan hesitates for a moment, remembering the stories, but shakes it off as nonsense. Just nonsense. He opens the door and slides into the back seat, mumbling his address to the driver. The driver nods without a word and pulls away from the curb. The interior of the cab is dark and musty, the only light coming from the dim, flickering dashboard. Ryan's leans back. Ryan leans back exhausted as the city's lights blur in the past. Something feels off, but he just can't quite place it. As they drive, Ryan notices that the route is unfamiliar. The streets are drenched. The streets are deserted. The buildings old and crumbling as if they've driven into a forgotten part of the city. He sits up, his unease growing, and asks the driver if they're going in the right way. The driver doesn't respond, just keeps driving, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Ryan leans forward, trying to get a better look at the driver's face, but it's hidden in the shadows, obscured by the brim of a dark cab. The unease turns to fear as Ryan realizes the driver is taking him farther from civilization. The city lights disappearing behind him. He pulls out his phone to call for help, but there is no signal. The cab continues down the empty streets. The engine's slow rumble, the sounds is oppressive. Silence, silence. Panic then sets in as Ryan demands the driver stop the car, but the driver ignores him. The cab speeding up as they enter a dark tunnel. The light inside the tunnel flicker ominously, casting eerie shadows across the back seat. Ryan's heart races, as he tries to open the door, but it's locked tight, the handle refusing to even budge. The tunnel seems to stretch on forever, the end nowhere in sight. The air grows cold and Ryan's breath fogs up the windows. He pounds on the glass, shouting for help. Help! 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 But the sound is swallowed by the darkness. Suddenly, the taxi comes to a screeching halt, throwing Ryan towards the seat. The driver turns slowly, finally revealing his face, a pale gaunt with hollow eyes that seem to glow in the dim light. The driver's lips curl into a twisted smile, and Ryan feels chills running down his spine. The driver speaks in a voice that seems to echo through the cab, low and rusty. This is your stop. This is your stop, he says, his eyes locking onto Ryan's. The door unlocks with a click, and Ryan feels an invisible force pushing him out of the cab. Ryan stumbles out of the cab, finding himself standing in the middle of a desolate street. The cab speeds away, its taillights folding in the distance. Disoriented, Ryan looks around and realizes he's standing in front of an old abandoned building with broken windows and a crumbling walls. Confused and terrified, Ryan approaches the building, drawn by a strange compulsion. The door creaks open as he steps inside, revealing a dark, empty lobby. The air is thick with dust, and the smell of decay hangs heavily in the air. As Ryan explores the building, he finds a series of old photographs hanging on the walls, each one depicting different people, men and women, all dressed in outdated clothing. At first, they seem like ordinary portraits, but as he looks closer, he realizes these are the people. These people in the photos have the same hollow eyes as the cab driver. Ryan's heart sinks as he spots a final photograph at the end of the hallway. Hanging slightly askew, the frame is old, the glass cracked, and the picture within it's faded. But the image is unmistakable. It's a picture of him, a picture of himself in the back of the taxi, his face frozen, an expression pure terror. The driver is visible in the front seat, his eyes staring back at Ryan through the rearview mirror, that same sinister grin stretching across his face. He stumbles backward, the weight of the realization crashing down on him. This wasn't just a strange, eerie ride. This was something far more sinister, something incapable. The photographs, the grinning driver, the unmarked taxi, all pieces of a puzzle he never wanted to solve. Ryan's breath quickens as he spins around, desperate to escape the building, the hallway, to stretch on endlessly. The walls close in, the air thick with a sense of gasoline and decay. The shadows flicker, shifting and meaning merging into a dark figure at the front end of the hall. It's the driver, standing over there with the eerie grin, his eyes growing thicker and more desolate. The driver raises a hand, pointing directly at Ryan. The air grows cold, and the whispers return louder, now echoing off the walls, telling him it's too late. It's too late for you. It's too late. He belongs to the taxi now. The lights flicker, and the hollow sense seems to twist and warp around him. The photographer, the photographs on the walls blur and change, showing not just him, but countless other passengers, each one trapped in the same moment of terror, their faces etched with the same realization that their fate was sealed the moment they stepped into the taxi. Ryan feels a cold hand on his shoulder and whirls around, but there's no one there. The driver's laughter echoes through the hall, growing louder and louder and louder, and he tries to run, but his heart won't move. His feet won't even move, rooted to the seat as if the house itself is holding him in place. The shadows close in, the shadows closing in the hallway, growing darker and more darker until they completely envelop in darkness, pure blackness, pure darkness. And the last thing Ryan sees is the flash of headlights that sound and the sound of the taxi engine roaring to life as it comes barreling down the hallway straight for him. He tries to scream, but no sound comes out, his voice stolen by the darkness. There's a blinding flash and then silence. You see, the next morning, the house is quiet, the hallway empty, the photographs hanging on, still on the walls, each one depicting a different passenger, a different story, and a different taxi. His face twisted in terror, the driver's grin reflected in the rearview mirror shows the picture. You see the photographs hanging still on the walls. Each one has a different look, a different passenger, a different story. And at that very end, a new photograph is opened up. It's Ryan sitting in the back of the taxi with a twisted terror look on his face, and the taxi's grim reflected driver's expression. The house remains as it always has, a silent witness to the countless souls who have fallen victim to the cursed taxi. Their faces forever trapped in the photographs, the stories lost, the darkness has, has taken everything, and somewhere in the city streets, the taxi continues to drive, searching for its next passenger. What a frightful tale, Madam Mina. I hope that one sent shivers down your spine. And I hope everybody has had a fantastic time on the Fright Files. Do you want to tell one more scary story, Madam Mina, before we exit? Or do you want to save it for next week's continuation of the Fright Files?
I got a rather long one. This one maybe we should save it for next time because this one is a bit of a doozy.
Ooh, Fright fans, Fright fans, this is to be continued as Madam Mina leaves us all hanging in chills and frightful terrors. And with that being said, I want to thank everybody here at the Fright Files for having the courage to survive till the end. I want to thank everybody in the chat room and all of our fans all over the world for thank you for coming here. Thank you for staying with us till the end. And for those who left early because they're too scared, Dr. Fright says, "Phooey on you." Dr. Fright says, thank you to all who are here at the Fright Files. And a big thank you to Madam Mina, for it is her help that makes this show so frightful. And with that being said, we bid you a frightful farewell. Stay scary, stay scared, and we'll see you next week on the Fright Files.